And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, as always, we're going to be doing a quick recap of all of the NBA games that went down from last night. Since there were only 4 games that went down the previous night, that means there's a lot of games that went down last night. So there's a lot of games to review. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about the big game, like the big story behind this game. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they beat the Dallas Mavericks 121-119, and it was a very, very close game. Very close game. And a very good way to end the game as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we want to talk about the story about the Mavs and the Cavs. So obviously, Kyrie Irving, great player for the Dallas Mavericks, was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers first overall in 2011, and he was the second best player on their one and only championship in 2016, where he helped hit the game-winning shot to beat Golden State in Game 7 and complete the 3-1 comeback. And again, like I was talking about in the last segment, how Giannis might be the best player and Dame could be the closer. That's sort of the same dynamic with like LeBron James and Kyrie Irving back at that time. Like LeBron was obviously the best player in that finals, but Kyrie was the one that closed the game out. And that's a dynamic that they can have. Obviously, like we know LeBron can hit those clutch shots late in the fourth, but Kyrie was the one that finished it. But obviously, like Kyrie is like, he's a big fan, like for depending on who you ask, a lot of people have mixed opinions with Kyrie. But when you ask Cavs fans, they like Kyrie now because like he won them their only championship, and it's like you have to respect the player who hit the game-winning shot in Game 7. So that's sort of the story in his return to Cleveland. He also gave them a nice message over on Twitter, showing how much he appreciated all the fans in Cleveland for his work and all that stuff. And that's the story behind this game and why it was really like it was significant. Kyrie also put on a good show for these Cavs fans, scoring 30 points. Luka Doncic scored 45 points with 14 assists as well. And they ended up losing, unfortunately, because Max Strus ended up hitting a half-court buzzer beater to win the game. And Donovan Mitchell ended the game with 31 points. Jarrett Allen ended the game with 19. Evan Mobley ended with 12. And Max Strus ended with 21 points. Now, Max Strus, he shot 7 for 12 from the field and 7 of 10 from 3. He went 5 for 5 in the fourth quarter. That was one of the most clutch fourth quarters from a role player that I've seen in a while. And he ended up hitting the game-winning shot to help win them the game in the end. So this was a great game all around for the Cavs, and a great game all around for the Mavericks. And with this 40-point game from Luka Doncic, I believe he has become, I'm just looking at it. Yes, I'm looking at the numbers. He is now tied Wilt Chamberlain as the second most 35-plus point games before turning 25 years old. And Luka Doncic has done that 92 times, same with Wilt Chamberlain. The player to beat, I'm sure you all know his name, LeBron James. So LeBron, before turning 25, scored 35-plus points in 103 games. And Luka Doncic has 92, so he has 11 more games to go. So we'll see if Luka Doncic ends up breaking that record as well, further boosting him in the MVP ladder and as an MVP favorite. But that's the story around this game. Another game that went down, you guys know what's coming. Brooklyn Nets, they ended up losing to the Orlando Magic 108-81. Obviously, like this new coach that the Brooklyn Nets got still needs to adjust to how this team is supposed to, how the offense is supposed to go. Still needs to like make all these adjustments. It's brand new territory for this coach, and the Magic didn't really play well, but at the same time they didn't really need to play well with this Brooklyn Nets team. Mikal Bridges did not show up whatsoever in this game. He shot 2 of 13, 0 of 7 from the 3. Only 4 points. Again, the shooting splits were relatively even across the board, so they're still trying to do that team basketball. They're still trying to have that team mentality and that team game plan, but it hasn't really been working. And it's not going to work if you have Mikal Bridges going 2 for 13. And on the Orlando Magic side, Franz Wagner ended the game with 21 points. And that was really like the only thing that the only bright spot on the offense for the Orlando Magic. They didn't have Paolo Banchero in this game, so again, like, it looked like the Nets had a chance. It looked like we had a chance, but we're the Brooklyn Nets. That's never going to happen. Golden State ended up beating the Washington Wizards in Chris Paul's return to the Golden State Warriors and the rotation. And in Jordan Poole's return to trying to play against his former team. Obviously, we know Golden State, they let Jordan Poole go, and the Washington Wizards, they signed Jordan Poole. I'm actually going to talk about Jordan Poole a bit more in the fourth segment that's coming up, so stay in tune for that. But obviously, like the Wizards, one of the worst teams in the NBA. Kyle Kuzma had a tweet saying, basically, don't be that team, and that team that he was talking about is the Pistons. And as of right now, the Wizards have the exact same record as the Detroit Pistons. So, hasn't really been looking well for Kyle Kuzma in that tweet. And it's starting to look like one of the most ironic tweets in NBA history. But he ended up having a great game, too, ironically, scoring 27 points on 12 rebounds. And everybody on the Wizards, they had a great game, except for Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole only had 12 points, shot 17 shots, and only made 5 of them. And I'm not going to talk about Jordan Poole much because I do want to talk about him later in the next segment. But Tyus Jones ended the game with 14 and 17 assists. So that's very impressive. For a team that isn't really that good, the fact that he ended with 17 assists is astonishing in my personal opinion. But the Warriors, they didn't play that well this game either. Stephen Curry, for the first time in a while, was held scoreless in the first half. But he ended up picking it up in the second half, where he ended with 18 points. He didn't shoot the ball efficiently at all, 6 for 21. But in the end of the day, he didn't really need that. Klay Thompson, coming off the bench, he's sort of been showing that he can't come off the bench, and he might be better for him to come off the bench. He scored 25 points in this game, 9 for 16. Jonathan Kuminga, fantastic basketball player. Great. The experience that Draymond has is definitely rubbing off of Kuminga. And he's really the player that can talk the talk and walk the walk. He shot 10 for 13 from the field with 21 points. Clear cut, the second best option on the team. Maybe even the third option. I'm not sure like how we're doing with Klay Thompson. I have Klay as the third option and Kuminga as the second option. But he's around there, and it's astonishing what he's been doing. So, and Chris Paul, while he didn't really do much on the stat sheet, only 9 points on 3 for 6, obviously he went in and he helped like the rotation. He got 4 steals, so that was more possessions for the Golden State Warriors. He also ended with 6 assists. Not relatively like great numbers that we usually see from Chris Paul, but given that he only played 22 minutes and his role on the team is significantly less than his role on several other teams, it's great production coming from Chris Paul. But not really much that needs to be said. The Golden State Warriors are clear-cut the better team, and Jordan Poole and the Washington Wizards are definitely not what they were expected to be this year. But that was basically it. The Boston Celtics continue showing everyone that they're the best team in the NBA. They beat the Sixers 117-99. The Celtics, they own the Sixers, and they've been owning the Sixers for the longest time. So it's no surprise that the Celtics were able to come out with this win. Tyrese Maxey ended the game with 32 points, but the rest of the team didn't really show up in the starting lineup. There were some bench players that ended up showing up, but again, this is far from the response that I expected the Sixers to have from losing Embiid. So we saw that they were ranked like 14th in power rankings in the yesterday, I believe, but again, I feel like this ranking should be like, they should be way lower than 14. They should be like bottom 20 at this point with what they've been showing me from this team. And Maxey, again, he had 32 points, but it wasn't enough for the high-powered offense of the Boston Celtics. Jaylen Brown ended the game with an efficient 31 points, 11 of 14 from the field. Jason Tatum ended the game with 29 points. Kristaps Porzingis also ended the game with 23. Drew Holiday ended with an efficient 13 on 6 for 8 shooting. And that's all that really needs to be said. The Boston Celtics have shown that they are the best team in the Eastern Conference, and all that's left to prove for them is if they can make it all the way to the finals. That's sort of the expectation for Boston. They are finals bound, if you will. And let's see. Let's look at some other games that went down. Milwaukee, they beat the Charlotte Hornets 123-85. This is the largest win this is the largest win difference for the Milwaukee Bucks, as they ended up, obviously this game was a blowout. This game was never close to begin with. From the start of the first quarter, this game wasn't close. To the end of the first half, this game wasn't close. And obviously, the Hornets, they're one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. They have an argument for being worse than Washington and the Pistons. Actually, they're close in record, but they don't really have an argument for being worse than those teams. But they're still really bad. They're bad, but not Pistons and Washington Wizards level bad. And there wasn't really much production on the offense for the Charlotte Hornets. Everybody shot inefficiently except for Trey Mann, who ended up with 16 points on 6 for 12 from the field. Brandon Miller ended the game with 14 points on 14 shots. So obviously there was not much production going on the offensive side of the ball for Charlotte. And Giannis Antetokounmpo ended the game with an efficient 24 points on 8 for 13 from the field. Damian Lillard also ended the game with an efficient 23 points on 8 for 14 from the field. So, and overall, the spread and the scoring, it was really more of a defensive, dominant performance than it really was an offensive dominant performance, I guess, from the Bucks. At least going by how the scores of this game. In the first quarter, there was a lot of scoring coming in from the Bucks, but it sort of went down a little bit in the second. They still kept scoring, obviously, but it wasn't the same, and it wasn't like they were just repeatedly scoring so much. And it was more so defense, because again, they held Charlotte to 85 points. That's defense right there. And again, that's something that they sort of lacked, having Dame at the point guard, given the fact that he's not that good of a defender. So far, though, the Bucks, they've come out of All-Star break and they've been winning a lot of these games. So maybe now they've sort of figured it out. We still have to see. It's still early, but maybe they figured it out, and maybe they're not going to lose a bunch of games maybe it's not expected for them to lose a bunch of games now like it was before. And other games that went down, other important games that went down. The Pelicans went up against the New York Knicks, and they ended up beating them 115-92 in the Garden. Obviously, as I mentioned previously, the Knicks are still suffering from players that have injuries. 3 players on the Knicks starting rotation had to play 40 minutes, and there was no Brunson this time in this lineup. So it sort of makes sense how the Knicks couldn't prevail. Someone made a hot take previously that the Knicks would be a bottom team without Jalen Brunson. I don't entirely believe that, because there's still other pieces to the team that aren't healthy, so it's unfair to make that assumption just yet. But obviously, without having Jalen Brunson in the rotation, your offense is going to fall a little bit. So it makes sense that the Knicks were unable to prevail in this game, and I still don't think that the Knicks should worry about anything. I think that they have the best chances to go up against the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, if the Bucks don't figure it out. Because again, if the Bucks end up figuring it out, then my opinion would change, because I have a lot more faith in the Bucks and their experience than I would the Knicks in their experience. But still, the Knicks, I think they should be the second favorite when they're fully healthy, and the team that could end up beating the Boston Celtics. That's just my personal opinion, however. DiVincenzo ended the game with 23 points. Bogdanovic ended the game with 20, and Precious ended the game with 15. Josh Hart ended the game with 15 as well, and McBride ended the game with 10 points. Now, obviously, these stats, they're relatively split, and and they aren't really efficient. I didn't really bring up the shooting because all of those players that I mentioned, they shot very inefficiently from the field. So that obviously played a part as to why they didn't end up winning. The Pelicans, on the other hand, obviously we know how good of a team that they are when they have Zion in the lineup and when they have Brandon Ingram and CJ. Those three guys are great players, a great big three that they got. Brandon Ingram ended the game with 24. Zion ended the game with 21. And there was no McCollum in this game, however, but we all know what all three of them can do, like, as a team. So I guess now that since McCollum wasn't in the lineup, it was a little bit even, given how the Knicks didn't have Jalen Brunson. But still, I feel like the Knicks had a lot more players that weren't in the rotation than the Pelicans, and this loss was like expected for the Pelicans, and not something that the Knicks should really worry about going on later into the season. The Timberwolves, they continue their hot streak of winning a bunch of games, beating the San Antonio Spurs 114-105. Victor Wembanyama, he's ended the game with 17-13. Obviously, not really much to talk about in this game, other than like Victor Wembanyama's performance and Anthony Edwards ending the game with 34 points. It was just the standard, the best team in the West going up against the worst team in the West, and obviously, like, the best team ended up prevailing. So, Victor Wembanyama, he's like, while he didn't really play well in this game, he's still, in my opinion, the clear-cut Rookie of the Year, and there's no other player that's going to pass him in that Rookie of the Year. He's leading the league in blocks as a rookie and averaging 3 of them. That is incredibly impressive for a rookie, and obviously, like, his height is going to play a part into that. But it's how he uses his height and how he takes advantage of that height. I mean, a lot of players are relatively tall and have relatively big wingspan. Like Kristaps Porzingis, we haven't seen Kristaps do that. So I just wanted to talk about that just for a little bit because I'm big on Victor. I like Victor Wembanyama. He's a great player. I'm very excited to see what he has in store for the rest of this season. Now, the Hawks, they ended up beating the Utah Jazz without Trae Young, as I mentioned for a little bit and I mentioned in a short. Trae Young is out of the rotation for now due to an RCL injury on his left hand, and because of that, like, since he can't really shoot the ball, he needs his left hand to shoot the ball, he can't really play. But it didn't really seem to affect the Atlanta Hawks when going up against the Jazz. I think the Jazz are going through a tough rebuild right now after the recent trades where they gave up Kelly Olynyk and they gave up all those other pieces. And I feel like they're going to try to build through the draft and build the team for Lauri Markkanen, and that's the direction that they're in. So they're tanking, especially since they're out of the play-in now with Golden State in the play-in. They're tanking. The Hawks, I feel like they should also take that same trajectory of tanking, however, because, again, now, especially when they don't have Trae Young should leave. He should leave the Hawks. I feel like his talents are being wasted over there. But not much on Trae Young. They're 10th in the Eastern Conference. I feel like now is the time for them to just call it the season and it's over. Like, it's over. The season for them is done. They need to rebuild. They need to try to get more pieces because they aren't really going to go anywhere with this team. I don't see them going anywhere. We're running out of time, so I'll just recap. I'll just briefly cover the rest of the scores for some of these games. Oh my goodness, the Pistons. They ended up winning a game. They beat the Chicago Bulls 105-95. I completely forgot about this game because it's the Pistons. And I don't really talk about the Pistons all that much. But the Chicago Bulls, they shot 2 for 29 from 3. And that was the reason why they ended up losing to the Pistons by 10 points. Because that is some of the worst shooting numbers I've ever seen from a team. It was the second worst in a game in NBA history with a minimum of 25 attempts. That's what it took for the Pistons to win this game. So that was a once in a blue moon thing. If that didn't happen, the Bulls would have ended up winning this game. But obviously they ended up missing. So makes sense how that ended up happening. But yeah, very surprised that they ended up winning that game. And very surprised with how bad Chicago was in that game. But Chicago definitely needs to go through a rebuild. And I've been saying this before, where they hold on to Zach LaVine and they don't get rid of him. They got to get rid of him or they got to try something new. They got to get rid of either DeRozan, Vucevic, something like that. Because the lineup that they have now, with all of this, it's not working. Like, you might say that I'm over-exaggerating because, they just lost one game to the Pistons. It's not that deep. They've been doing this sort of hold on to their player strategy for the longest time, and it's not working, and they're not going anywhere. And I feel like something needs to change. The Thunder, they beat the Houston Rockets 112-95, and the Heat, they ended up beating the Blazers 106-96. So not really much that needs to be talked about those games because those are just better teams beating the worst teams, which is expected. So with that, we're out of time for the with this third segment. So join me for our fourth segment where I go ahead and introduce something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about some of the more disappointing players this season as opposed to some of the good players this season. You hear me talk about the good players. Now I'm going to talk about the players that are a bit disappointing, in my opinion. So I will be right back after this short break.